I think what you're trying to sell is not sustainability. You're trying to sell desirability. Pasta was horrible. Like the prototype he showed me it was not good.
I mean, turning bread into pasta in the head sounds easy, same ingredients. How was the journey for you, and what is Get Wasted?
Well, maybe I should just give a small correction. I wish it was called Get Wasted, but it is
Eat Wasted, sorry.
I did try and buy the name Get Wasted back
No way.
in the early days. It wasn't available. Jorge and I always said, like, all right, we got to bring it to Italy and to Chef Massimo. And so it didn't work out. And I was like, all right, like, we flew all this way. I'm just going to sort of sit outside the restaurant until chef comes by, and he did, and someone took out their phone and recorded, and yeah, it really like changed our lives overnight.
If you think being a chef means working in kitchens, this episode might change that, because today's guests are not just cooking. They're building a company, a product, a brand, and doing it around one of the biggest problems in our industry: food waste. You are listening to Fugitive Chefs, a podcast about what happens when chefs step outside the traditional kitchen path. I'm Furkan. I've worked in kitchens like Noma and Mugaritz, and now I work outside as a senior innovation chef at Kraft Heinz. And today I'm speaking with Leif and Jorge, the founders of Eat Wasted, a company turning surplus bread into pasta and rethinking how we use ingredients at scale. What makes their story interesting? It's not just the product, but about how they move from kitchens and hospitality into building something of their own. Okay, Leif and Jorge, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much for joining in. I feel it's like, as I was telling you before we started recording, for me it's very, very difficult to, in the sense it's difficult that I do not know where should I look for people to get on the podcast, because what I'm tapping into is people who are not the classic chef carriers or kitchen carriers. And then Leif specifically was mentioned because I think you worked with Nick at some point in Canada, and he was on the podcast, and he said, like, yeah, you should definitely have Leif. And of course, I've heard about both of you and heard about Get Wasted. Mostly, I think my access into people who are listening would have been through the videos that came out of Osteria Francescana. I know Rene's staff canteen. You were there at some point in Noma doing some food. Tell me about, first, both of you, what do you do within Get Wasted? And what is Get Wasted? Whoever wants to can take this up.
Well, maybe I should just give a small correction. I wish it was called Get Wasted, but it is
Eat Wasted. Sorry. It's the second time this has happened, because I was telling my girlfriend I want to interview these guys. She's like, oh, they really call Get Wasted? That's a cool name. But no, I think, but does it come from there? Does the idea come from Get Wasted? No, nothing to do with that.
I did try and buy the name Get Wasted back
No way.
in the early days. It wasn't available.
Well, that's a segue. No, tell me about Eat Wasted. Sorry for that again.
Okay, I think maybe Jorge, I should let you explain where the name comes from now that we've started here.
Yeah, I think it's I don't know. When we started without a name.
Mm-hmm.
There was really no like sense of like what should the project should be called. And I think for me, like, a word that was like, like constantly being repeated, especially by Leif, and like, like the food industry was, like waste and wasted. And for me, I think coming from advertising and creative agencies, I don't know, I think I have a inclination to pick, like very loud and like, like names that makes you look around and, think twice. So I think it came from this like provocative point of view of like, like challenging people of, this is a wasted pasta, like, oh, and I think immediately once you say it's the name wasted pasta, people start asking questions. I think it's like a great way to open a door and have people into the conversation. So I think really that was the origin of the name.
And what's your backgrounds like Jorge? Now that you're talking about this, tell me about your background, and then Leif, if you could fill in like what's your background before getting into this.
Sure. Well, my background is, as I said, in advertising. Worked in a few different agencies in Mexico City, but also in the US. I was mainly specialized in food and beverage. This agency was an independent agency, mainly doing brand activations, music festivals, but there was a big part of their clients were inclined to food and beverage. So I started working a lot with specifically spirit companies, and like tequila is from Mexico, also mezcal. So I was working for big mezcal and tequila companies, and that was actually the reason I ended up moving to Copenhagen. I was brought in to join the Empirical Spirits team. I don't know if you remember
Yes,
Empirical
of course.
Spirits.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was like my entry point to Copenhagen and like the fine dining world, kind of. So it was like this in between point of building brands, um, you know, doing all the marketing behind them, and then also having one foot inside of the fine dining world.
Yeah, that's really cool. How about your Leaf?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up loving to cook. Dream was always to work in and open my own restaurant from quite a young age. I kind of went, knocked on the door of my local bistro and told them like, hey, I want to come work here. And they were kind of skeptical and took like a lot of convincing, even though I was just like trying to work for free. But like when you're small and little, they're just skeptical of what you can do. But really, for me, I was just always wanting to learn and like get my foot in the door. And so I started, yeah, like in one local restaurant and then kind of slightly better local restaurant, and eventually kind of began like all my summers and holidays while I was in middle school and high school working in kitchens. And that's kind of where I think I fell in love with the beautiful sides of hospitality and cooking and kind of the restaurant industry, but also saw a lot of the like, I don't call it like dark sides, but like the trade-offs that come with
Yeah.
the industry. And I think for me, like the waste was a big thing because growing up in Canada and also the family I was in, there was, always this big emphasis on like giving back. And I grew up in the food industry as well. My uncles had a restaurant. My grandfather was actually producing pasta. I remember my uncles would always just like give food that was left over in the kitchen to like homeless people. Like basically in like the back of the restaurant, if they had leftovers, they would make like beautiful bowls of food and give it away to people that needed it. And so like that was sort of the normal in my mind. And then I started working in Michelin restaurants where it was so inspiring to be part of this like journey of creating something really beautiful for a guest, but I always left feeling a little bit like frustrated and empty that we threw out these huge bags of food and then there was people outside who hadn't even had dinner, especially when I'd seen a different reality. So I think for me that was like the big catalyst that started to make me think about, all right, how do we actually get all of this surplus food that wasn't just, I quickly learned, happening in the one or two restaurants I was working in, but really like across our whole food system to people who don't have enough to eat. And that was like the spark that made me think, all right, this might be bigger or different than just like a career in traditional restaurants, which is kind of what I had always dreamed
Yeah.
of in the beginning.
No, that's for me very interesting what you say, Leaf, because a lot of people that come on the podcast and say, okay, there happened something. There's always something that happens, whether it's your family situation, whether it's more about your values not aligning with something you're doing. There's always this thing that initiates the pivot. But I also question then if for you, when you saw this problem with food waste or whatever's happening to that, why was the idea not? Because as you said, the classical path would have been, okay, I will do it better. My kitchens will do it better, and I will start a restaurant, and that will do it better. When did this idea become more of a entrepreneurial side to it? Like, okay, that is what's going to solve this value alignment that I'm finding right now.
I mean, it didn't happen overnight. I think the first thing that I actually thought about was creating a restaurant that maybe had some kind of like more of a social mission or cause. Like, I don't know, a soup kitchen where someone could also pay. And then each time you bought a bowl, like we would donate one. So I was starting to think about like how we could use like consumers or a community who wanted to do good to kind of pass that on to the next person. I guess I didn't want to start a charity. I was pretty clear about that because I didn't like this feeling or idea of always like being reliant on donations, and huge respect for the incredible food charities that are like an integral part of keeping both like our food system and food insecure communities fed and functioning. But I think for me, I just didn't feel like that was like where my skill set was or like where I could make the most effort. And I'd always been kind of like hosting my own dinners and like creating these food experiences and had been like playing around with products. And so I think I just felt that I could make a bigger impact and do something that I was more excited about by creating, a product that had value. And so what grew from first being like some kind of soup kitchen model, then I started working and helping people develop consumer packaged goods. And I was like, wow, there's so much scale that you can get here. And imagine like a consumer product that used waste. We can sell this in thousands of stores. Millions of people can eat it every single day. And it just outlives, in my eyes, like what a restaurant could create or, do on an impact level. So that's really where I started to think about, creating consumer product. But it was like a very slow process of like
Yeah.
having this like sort of back of mind thought in the restaurant kitchens and then thinking, okay, how could I change this? And then having like big whiteboards and trying to think like, all right, here's all the wasted foods. Here's what I could make out of them. And that's kind of when I met Jorge. I was in the early stages of like combining all of these sort of trains of thought. And I kept coming back to bread. I think from like a culinary standpoint, anyone that's worked with
Yeah.
food, it's a really obvious like base, it's made of such a simple ingredient and you can toast it to bring flavor out, but you can also like grind it into flour or, use it to brew beer. I'd seen people doing that, but I was like, all right, what's something we could make out of bread, which is this like perfect canvas that could both be a food of the people, but also have a donation model. And at the same time, as I started talking to charities, they were like, actually, like we're always really short on pasta because it doesn't go bad. I was like, pasta is a food that young people love. So it kind of like slowly developed into this like framework where I was like, wait, what if we take bread, which is the most wasted food in the world, and turn it into pasta? And that's kind of where I was at when I met Jorge. And
Wow.
I shared this idea, and he was one of the first people that I met and like told about this that really just like got it, and I think clicked in his mind. I mean, I'll let you share more about that, Jorge, but yeah, I think that was a very like important element.
It's very interesting what you say, because I feel bread also is not the first, even though it's so obvious and it's so clear. Like I remember doing this presentation in Wageningen in university with this amazing guy. I want to give him a shout out, called Frank Holleman, which does this thing called Folk Ranger in Netherlands. And he does a lot of content with the Lego videos. I guess you must have seen how he shows the carbon footprint. And I want to mention that specifically for Jorge, because Jorge, you coming from a brand perspective of like, how do you brand and market, coming from beverage specifically, which I feel beverage, I think because of the cost aspect to it, and also because how I feel it's a little less complex than how the food world is, especially in the fine dining scenes, that it's been optimized to not have waste. It still has its own obvious side streams which end up as waste. But for you, what side of a brand perspective do you see in it? Because again, I asked this question because there is, just in Copenhagen, right? There's tons of restaurants doing, calling them sustainable, or like doing stuff with food waste. I remember having a chat with Matt Orlando when Amas was back then open with Kim, and they used to do this almond milk, but they had the waste from the almond milk. At one point, the almond milk became the waste because they started using the waste so much, and they had to produce the milk for the waste. How much of a role do you see, Jorge, of branding in a good and a bad way? Because again, you can make something look less wasteful by how you place and position it, the words you use, how you place it in the menu. What are some things that you've seen as an outsider in the industry that are not being done correctly?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the main things I've noticed is I don't come from a culinary background, even though I've always like been playing around in the kitchen. But one of the things I've noticed, and this is more recently, is like, a restaurant, it's like it's like a mini universe, like in a restaurant, you can control most of the components, I think, So I think sometimes a chef goes into a restaurant thinking, I'm going to make a zero waste restaurant and this is going to change the world. I think it does. Like, I mean, storytelling, narrative, it's very inspiring, but it's still within like like a micro level. Still, it's a restaurant, And one of the things that I was like very keen on that is like, how can we scale this into into a bigger impact? How can we turn waste into actually something you want to buy, you want to consume on your day to day? And that's where it gets very interesting from a branding perspective. I think what you're trying to sell is not sustainability. For me, it's you're trying to sell, at least for me, I'm trying to sell desirability. I want this to be desirable. I want the dinners we started hosting to people, for people to be, intrigued and come and show and desire this, consuming something that was supposed to be trash. I think that's where it comes from. And that's mainly the biggest challenge I saw. And for me, it was a super exciting challenge. And yeah, I think that's where I mean, not saying like restaurants can't do impact. I think it's amazing. I'm inspired. I was inspired by restaurants to go and start do this, but I think the way we can really achieve, like larger impact is if, your everyday pantry staples are made from some kind of upcycled ingredient. I think that's really where you round up the whole circle.
Yeah, and how do you react, Jorge, when a Leif comes to you and tells you about this idea? Because I feel if Leif would have gone to a restaurant, it will be easier because there's so many layers that you can have this pasta dish on their menu. Like, I mean, Amas does this. Used to do something with fishbone noodles, right? You can sell that, and then you have the layer of the sommelier serving something with it. You have the decoration. You have every layer of it, which gives permission to be experimental. Whereas FMCG, CPG, what do we call it? It's so less. I don't know. There's no room for mistakes over there. You're talking about staples like bread and pasta. What was your reaction to it? Did you were you scared by the ambition, or was it like you saw it as a challenge? How did you react to him coming to you?
I don't know. I think it was a very like wholesome reaction from my part, because I was at the same time trying to figure out something with the spent grain we were having at the distillery. I was still like trying to grab it and play around, but it's like very, very moist and like highly moisted, and it's difficult to dehydrate it. I was trying to we were at the same time working on something similar without knowing. And the moment he told me, I just like dumped everything and went and like deep dive into bread, because I think bread is like such a universal icon, and you can find bread in almost every culture, like some variation of bread. So that's where I got very interesting. It was funny because he invited me over to his place to try the prototype, and of course I said yes. I was super curious. I wanted to try it, and that's something like on restaurants, like restaurants, you can get immediate feedback. It's like if you bring a dish and it's not good, like you're gonna know, right? So I think, as to your point, this was for us like a very quick process, because the pasta was horrible. Like the prototype he showed me was not good, but it is good because it's a starting point. It's a place where you can start improving. And I think from there it took us, I don't know, like I would say like 6 months. I would say like 5-6 months to perfect the recipe to a point where it was almost indistinguishable to fresh pasta,
Yeah.
So yeah, really really good moment there when he invited me to try the pasta.
Yeah, Leif, I feel like Jorge is not an easy guest to impress, right? How was that for you? I mean, turning bread into pasta in the head sounds easy. Same ingredients, let's just make it. How was the journey for you, and how was from your end as being the person serving this to Jorge? How was the experience for you to reach that recipe?
Yeah, I think like to recap, it was really in the beginning about like selling the vision and concept, which Jorge really understood before anyone else. And yeah, I think there was sort of like this mutual understanding that the pasta is like going to be bad in the beginning.
Okay.
Because there was a very steep learning curve. And I also didn't like this idea of like, oh, I'll perfect it and then show it to you. No, it like more felt like, okay, let's start iterating. And even like very, very soon after, like probably a few days later, we're like, let's just invite our friends to try it. And even though the pasta was bad, people kept coming back, and we started hosting these like weekly Wasted Wednesdays even before we had the name Wasted. And people, I think, felt very empowered to see something before it was in its perfect form, and then see the improvements and feel part of them. So, they'd come and be like, oh, can you try making it more like this, or add more elasticity, or, how can you get the bite better? And it was like everyone kind of somehow was part of this early innovation. And some of the people who were at those very first dinners ended up investing in Wasted, becoming our first employees, like helping really champion the brand. And to this day, they're still the people that, will go and support us when we have big events. And it's a really beautiful kind of journey to be part of. So I'm really glad that we didn't wait until it was perfect, because it's still not perfect. We're still innovating, we're still improving, we're still changing the packaging, we're changing the formulations, we're making it more environmentally friendly, we're making it, easier to process. We're like, it's this constant innovation. And the like trajectory is like And you start with something bad in CPG, and then you make something good, but then you need to make something scalable. And that's a totally different challenge and problem to work around. So I think as soon as that like innovation curve stops is like when you kind of become irrelevant. And so it's something we've just really brought our community, along with and allowed them to be a part of. So I guess that's a little bit of how we saw the development in the early days.
Yeah, and Leaf, for you, like beyond like serving that first dish, which is more like cooking a dish, now creating a product out of it, which can be yeah sold and be available at your retail supermarket. How much do you take from the process of building a dish in a kitchen, and how different is it from that? Is there something you can take from your being in a kitchen and building a dish? Is that transferable? Maybe not directly, but with some adjustments to creating a product, for example.
I mean, I think that it is and it isn't.
Mm-hmm.
In certain sense, like the feedback loop of a restaurant is very valuable for
Yeah.
creating like a 0 to 1. So from going to like, if I think somebody who had not ever worked in a restaurant wanted to create a food product, they'd go and they'd hire a food scientist and it would be really expensive and they'd like formulate the commercial version first. But we really formulated the like tasty version first. And I
Yeah.
think that that allowed us to, build a lot quicker, iterate more efficiently. And definitely like the kitchen experience gets you to like the MVP version. I think getting it to the next stage is where it gets really hard. And we kind of tried to build our own manufacturing facility and truthfully really struggled with like getting the product consistency right and managing, like efficiency on like drying and packing. And like it's just a totally different kind of business to run. And eventually we kind of determined that we need to outsource it. And that's where like I think the magic really started to happen
Mm-hmm.
because we took this like culinary innovation quality lens, but then applied it with factories and food kind of scientists who actually knew how to scale something. And then what resulted was a product that was much more consistent, much more impactful, could be made at a much more, efficient cost and volume. So I think you can only get it so far would be like my 2 cents. And you have to know like when to hand it off and also how to compromise because I think that's one of the things that limits, you know, great, restaurants from maybe like scaling something is you're trying to make the absolute best. But there's only
Yeah.
so much of the absolute best that you can make. And I think we always took the approach of like, we're going to make a really, really great pasta. It doesn't need to be the best pasta in the world because the best pasta in the world, people aren't eating a lot of it anyways. And we want to be, in this middle ground where it's a really, really good pasta. It's probably as good, if not better, than many of the pastas you can buy in the store. But it's also going to be an accessible price point and like a format that makes sense so that everyday people can, have access to this. That's where impact happens. So we were quite intentional about also saying like we're willing to make those compromises, especially in the beginning, if it furthers our mission.
Yeah, and for you, Jorge, like Leif spoke to us about how it works for him, the scaling up the product part. But for you to make this more than a product, as like more than a concept, what challenges are you seeing right now with like how do you approach it? First of all, do you approach it the same way as you used to do with the tequila and mezcal, which is a known product, to now going to more the consumer education part, right? Like for them to accept that waste could come packaged in a food and could be delicious. How is that journey for you?
Yeah, I think that's a super good question. I think, yes, Leif says, like at the beginning, you gotta iterate very quickly. You gotta come up with an MVP good enough that people can understand, because that's the first part. People need to understand the product. I would say also like something I've realized like after like 2-3 years we've been doing this, like we're also not only fighting we're not only fighting food waste, we're also fighting perception, like the perception of waste. So I think that's been, I think so far, the most challenging part. And this is part of the reason we started from the grassroots part. We started building a community. We made people part of the the creation process. We made them part of like the dinners, like they were able to try it before anyone. And that's where I think a lot of good things really come from collaboration. And from there also, talking about perception again, I think if you really want to change food waste perception, you not only need like the people, like the mass critic of people. You also need like the people above, that is mainly like chefs and chefs and industry leaders and the people above. So you need like really our strategy is like it's a push and a pull between these two layers, like one is gonna generate the consumption and the other one is gonna show and it's gonna dictate what is next and what is good for you and how we should change the food system. So really is that. And also just on that note, I think the reality and one of the biggest challenges we've encountered in the brand part of it is that people don't buy waste. People really go and buy they buy the taste.
Yeah.
Right. So I think if it's not good, if it's for more, like we could be the most sustainable product in the world, but if it doesn't taste good, it's never going to work. So I think combining these 3-4 elements that I mentioned, I think that's like how we created our recipe.
Yeah, and Leif, you mentioned about how there's always a compromise, right? There's always the struggle between scale and craftsmanship. In restaurants, you play in a very comfortable margin that you can have space for not scaling and just be yes, creative in that sense of the word. But for you, I think it has to be a massive learning curve, right? In terms of pricing, distribution, branding, operations. This morning, I was talking to my team, which is kind of seeing the scenario. We are launching some pasta sauces out of context, somehow connected with you guys, but in the Heinz market, and they're looking at what Amutzi does, what the other brands do. And then you realize how much of money just goes into retailers' pockets. Once you enter a supermarket, half of your margin just goes to a retailer. So understanding all these things for you as a chef, for me, what's very interesting is to know from you, like, what is the one part that from turning into a chef, into a founder of a company, changes, like the one you struggle the most with?
I mean, it's a good question. I think that it's probably the amount of things that are outside of your control. I mean, like Jorge talked about this earlier, but in a restaurant, at least a really good restaurant, there is a lot that you can control. I mean, like you can build an incredible space. You can, control the lighting, the music, the way that someone's welcome, the way that you explain the dish, the context. You can't really control like where this box ends up. It goes into thousands of stores and then hundreds of thousands of people's homes, and like how they cook that pasta is outside of your control. Like maybe they overcook it and then their friend comes and tastes it. And we've also seen this, like we sell to canteens. I don't like how the canteens cook our pasta. And we try and kind of like build this like, education model around like here's how you should cook it. But the reality is like if you're cooking 10,000 portions of like regular pasta, it's not going to be that good. But when people see that it's bread waste pasta, then you're being like judged on, the product itself and not how people are actually cooking it. And that's very hard because, someone could go to that canteen line and be like, oh, the pasta sucks. But like if they go and see it's bread waste pasta, now bread waste pasta sucks. So it's part of the journey of scaling both the impact and the business of it, letting go of those things and trying to like build some walls. It's like telling a great story on the packaging so that people do cook it well, or building relationships with the canteen chefs to educate. But at the end of the day, it is out of your hands how that product gets cooked, who gets served to. And yeah, that's something that like I've struggled with for sure. Like coming from a world where like if you serve 50 guests a night, you can make sure that that pasta is cooked perfectly. So I think it's a good thing for the most part. It's a healthy like thing to get over, and I can see the value also that it brings. But definitely it's a constant struggle to sort of like wrap my head around that.
Yeah. I think it doesn't come natural to us. I feel letting go or like losing control of that, and then again your product being judged at the end of the day just because of somebody who's not cooked it correctly, even though you've put all the messages out there. I think it's a very difficult emotion to deal with, especially when you're in this growing phase and you're competing people who have within corporate companies, we have a behavioral lab to see a consumer, how they open a packet. So when you're competing with a very different kind of set of resources, I guess. And Jorge, how is that for you? Because recently, actually, out of context of the podcast, but our partner works she's a learning designer. She's been writing Substacks about how CPG products are branded and written. So like everything we buy these days, like we bought a dim sum yesterday as a soup kind of dim sum from Ajinomoto, and they have this plastic which can go in the microwave, and there's a way to open it, but it's still so tricky. Like I can see the brand is trying to tell you how to best make the product so that you judge the product on its best conditions. But it's still, it's so much translation layers, languages, what you understand by make the onions brown, for example. What does brown mean? What does caramel mean? There's so many cultural layers to it. For you, Jorge, when it comes to beverage branding, I think it's, I would say, simpler because there's no cooking procedure. You're getting a ready-made product, pour that in your glass. You can possibly give serving suggestions. But with food, how does it change you as somebody operating on the brand and marketing side of things? What is the, like, any benchmarks you know in the industry, or what kind of work are you pushing with the challenges you're facing with Eat Wasted products?
Well, I think I was trying to think a little bit about like me and my relationship to pasta. And actually, for me, like pasta was like the first thing that I learned how to cook. Like that was the moment where I felt like, oh, I can put together a dish. You know, I can cook myself some spaghetti and like, you know, some bolognese and you know, like not starve. I think that was a point where I was like, okay, it's easy to be a chef. It's easy to craft a flavor. And now that I think about our product, I think one of the main reasons for me, like turning bread into pasta, was mainly because it's also like a universal language. You know, like most of the people know how to cook the product. Most of the people know what to expect. So I think as long as we were hitting that same experience, that same feel, I think we're already winning. It's very tricky, as Leif said, and the journey has been like a lot of up and downs and learnings. But I think we're in a very, very good point right now to the point where last month we just launched a noodle, like a wasted ramen with a partner in London with a restaurant. And I think now what I'm trying to create with Wasted is how can we keep coming with more pantry staples that people can easily understand, can easily cook, and also you can easily control the experience somehow, like far away. Yeah, I think that's like for us, like keeping things as simple as possible. I think that speaks inside of a kitchen and also outside of a kitchen, I think.
I think it's a very smart move. I feel associating also your first product coming out of the market being something that people, as you said, with different, maybe in Italian, would not agree that all people know to cook pasta, but at some level people know how to cook pasta. And I think that's a great place to start, because it's not just you doing the education. There's other brands with millions in the business doing the education, always to make better gadgets, better inductions, better ways, and consumer education videos to cook pasta. So I think that's a great takeaway. And I also saw, like, the first time actually for me, and maybe the listeners who are listening to this podcast, the first time I saw it was, I am not sure if it was the video with Massimo or it was with the staff canteen. How did that side of a collaboration come up? What was the intention over there? Has that also brought in an influx of people who know about the brand? How has that worked? For either of you can answer this.
I mean, it was really like a moment that could not have been engineered. Like there was no like plan for it to happen that way. For me, at least, Chef Massimo was always like a massive inspiration, both for like his innovation and work with food waste, but also like the work he does with Food for Soul. And, they're literally like taking surplus food and turning it into these beautiful, dignified meals. And I don't know, even before Wasted, I always kind of had this like dream of like going and spending time working there. And once we kind of like created this pasta, Jorge and I always said like, all right, we got to bring it to Italy and we got to bring it to Chef Massimo. And so, yeah, we had a friend that used to work there, and she was like, I'll be in Modena, come and like, let's see what happens. We'll try and cook staff meal. Didn't work out. We were supposed to come back to Copenhagen, and I was like, all right, like we flew all this way, paid all this money to like come here. I'm just gonna sort of sit outside the restaurant until chef comes by, and he did. And I think like he really just found a lot of like joy in our story and like our mission, and we were obviously inspired by him. And I think he was like really happy to see us coming back and bringing this product to him. And yeah, he really just like went into his kitchen and started talking about it. Like there was no plan. Someone took out their phone and recorded, and that like in our camera roll for more than a year before someone was like, wait, maybe we should post the video. And yeah, it really like changed our lives overnight, and incredibly grateful that you know, Massimo gave us this like platform and really stood behind the product. Before, like, we really had anything. Like, it was like in a random like vacuum sealed plastic bag. Like, he wasn't buying into the brand, he wasn't buying into the name. It was just like, okay, these young people are trying to do something in the world that's going to make it a better place. They're inspired by me, and he was excited. And I think
Yeah.
that's like how these special moments kind of happen.
Yeah, and I find it really cool. I feel like brands like yours and others I've had on the podcast, this Fava Mole, a guy doing in Netherlands, he's got government help in building guacamole from fava beans. There's a lot of these projects I'm seeing with people coming up with these ideas. What I'm finding great is that, of course, our industry of like food entrepreneurship won't become a unicorn. And no, we are not playing in the leagues of the AI companies of the world. But I feel we are still kind of grabbing the lessons that they are kind of doing of, like, say, build in public. I feel that is one key element in all these companies. I've seen a lot of work that you guys do is a lot about sharing not just the product but the milestones, the successes, being in the first, like the bill, for those who can see the video version, the receipt behind, Leif, if you can bend, there's a receipt behind you. So like sharing these moments, I feel that's what makes also, because again, if you do not have a legacy of being a 200 euro pasta company, where can you win clients and making you win people to have association with you? And I feel it's moments like these of using social media as a tool which makes, like, apart from the concept of the product, which is great, more attachments to it and more points that you can speak about. But for you Jorge, right now, business, when you can say, because Leif has just told us about how that serving from a plastic bag to Massimo from a vacuum packed bag, those pastas, to now where you stand today. Tell us about how Wasted is doing. What is the day-to-day business like? What is something that we can know about the Wasted business now and the near future?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're in the verge of something very exciting. The past 2-3 years, it's been a lot of like, like groundwork, a lot of like, building a brand, building community, doing, compromises with like, should we go do this? Should we go do that? And really, I think as a baseline, we've been slowly trying to improve the product. I think that's been like, for the past 2 years, 3 years, that has been the priority. So right now we are, very excited about the future. This year we're going to be launching in the US, first time ever, fully available nationwide in the US. So I think that's also for us very exciting, because we're stepping into a market where these products are really consumed. I think the consumer over there is pretty open to new stuff like this. And yeah, like we already have so much traction. So yeah, like we're spending more time in the US. We're still going to be around in Denmark, in Copenhagen, Europe, doing more events. But we're slowly trying to expand into new markets, slowly testing new products. Like I said, we tested in London these noodles that we're very excited. We've been dreaming about instant noodles, instant Wasted noodles. So we're trying to, create something around that. And yeah, I think that pretty much like sums up our main focus this year.
For now. Yeah. And Leif, for you, how is the product today? Like the product side of things, because of course there is compromises you make, right? Like today you have a manufacturer who does the work for you so you can reach more people and you can reach markets like the US. How is still the product's journey today? Just to understand, like for somebody saying pasta made from wasted bread, it's not coming from bins outside Lidl, right? So how is that? That is a very logically difficult part, because I speak to manufacturers who have like frozen vegetable business, and they're like, we are really wasting food because the legislation doesn't allow us to use that waste if it's mixed with a different stream. If broccoli and cauliflower is mixed, we can't give it to somebody else to and there are people doing, like I spoke to the people from Reduced on the podcast as well on how they are doing the whole business with Reduced also in Copenhagen. But for you today, for a layman to understand the pasta that you see, how does it end up there? What's the journey it has?
Yeah, so we work with mainly like production bakeries that are still producing artisanal bread, and by that I mean like only 3 ingredients, so flour, water, salt, yeast as well, water being one of those 4 ingredients. And yeah, we come in before it actually gets into the waste stream. So basically, if you think about production lines, everything that's misshapen, overproduced, it could even be like some of these bakeries have a mixer that fits 10,000 loaves of bread. and they only have an order for 8,000, but all of their production processes are dialed in to make 10,000. So they just make 10,000. And these
Right.
2,000 loaves of bread that are perfectly fine are going to go to the bin. So like you can think of wasted as like kind of like the last like stop where like there's two bins, you know, it's like the one that will get this bread turned into pasta, and there's the one that will go either to animal feed, bioenergy, or in like the worst case scenario, landfill. So we come in, we take that bread. Most of these bakeries also have frozen supply chains, so the bread's
Right.
frozen pretty much upon like the waste point. So there's no risk of like mold or like a stale product. Normally speaking, the bread that we use is fresher than the bread you'd find in the grocery store, which is very sad, but also like reassuring when people understand that it's definitely not from the bin outside Lidl, as you say. It's then dried and processed into flour, and then that's used as like an input in our pasta production process. And from there, like we're working, one of the big things that we were very adamant about is like this product needs to run on traditional pasta lines. Like that was something from the very, very beginning. We're like, we're not creating any custom machinery. The only like innovation lies in these formulations and our process and our supply chain. But if this is going to scale, the capex to build, you know, a custom factory is just like impossible. It's already so hard to innovate in the food industry. So one of the, you know, definitely things that has allowed us to scale like more quickly has been like this can plug into like existing factories. And probably the biggest challenge was just convincing factories on a large industrial scale that, you know, have been making pasta for 5, 6, 7 generations that like they should be putting bread in their pasta, because that was, especially in Italy, like a massive cultural clash where they just didn't want to take the risk and or like introduction of new processes to bring this kind of very novel ingredient into what is a very standardized, high speed, high scale production line. So that's really been the work of like proving it first in our own like pilot plant. Then we went to like a small scale factory in Italy. And then actually we decided to bring our production. We're working with 2 plants now, one in Italy and one in Germany. And the reason we went to Germany is there is less regulation on pasta production and the ingredients that have to be used. There is more processes for like innovation and novel pastas, and they were actually just able to work a lot faster and at a much bigger scale to incorporate this. I say this like without, you know, at all like bad mouthing the beautiful and important Italian pasta culture that exists. Just we found like to innovate and create this new product, it was actually easier to do it at scale outside of Italy.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, it's a lot of layers to it. I feel it's I feel like the way you have reached this process now, it's also like running a lot of walls and seeing that things that could be conceptually good do not really work on the real world. And I feel there's a lot of learning that both of you have right now at this stage. And also, which is why I have this podcast towards you, because I feel that a lot of people, maybe they have the idea, and I think it sometimes helps to also know what other people, because if I go to in your Instagram or LinkedIn, I can see where you are today, but I feel the journey is what makes it more worth it, because then you can see that, okay, if do I really want to sign up to this kind of thing? Also to know that maybe you have to trust in a friend, you know, to taste your product, and maybe they could turn down to be your business partners and see there and use both these skill sets to come up with a solution, right? And I wanted to ask you, Jorge, like today when you the Leif you knew before, who was a chef, and the other chefs that you see around yourselves, what is it that you see that a chef requires to be able to be in this position of being a business owner, who yes has the skills inherent to them because having worked in restaurants, but they're still willing to make compromises, they're still willing to understand the reality of the world is different from your own kitchen. So what are the skills that you see that a chef should have to be able to make this transition if their path is to be an entrepreneur?
Yeah, it's a tricky question because I've never been a chef myself, but
Which is why I think it's even cool, because I feel you can step out and say, this is what I see in the chefs I used to work with, and
yeah.
now today, yeah, more not all of them are cut out for this kind of a job, right?
Yeah, I mean, like chefs are like, I think to be a good chef and a chef overall, yeah, there's talent required. I think like not everyone can step into a kitchen and, you know, like be at performing at that level. I think it's, to me, that's already like a very, you know, like a very big box like checked, you know, like you're able to take pressure, you're able to take uh, bad feedback, like sometimes like a plate smash back in your face. So you can deal with all these things, which translating this into a business, like it's pretty similar in a way. I would say, although like in a kitchen, as we were talking, you can control everything. In a brand, almost like once your product is out there, you cannot really control it. So I think it's like navigating and learning and understanding how, from coming from a place where literally everything is controlled, like all of a sudden, like you have no control, which to me is like the exciting part. Like that's, I think any good brand, like it should, like any good brand is, I would say, like 10% what the founders bring in, and the 90% is what the people, what the people decide a brand is. That's really also the power of marketing, like that's in marketing. So yeah, I would say if you're a chef, you're for sure ready to go to work. And yeah, I don't see any issues in that. But I think it takes a lot of patience, it takes patience, and it's a longer, I would say, learning curve
No,
compared
100%.
to a kitchen.
Yeah, and Leif, for you, the parts of like the soft skills which chefs are mostly now very good at, from what I know and the people I've met, communication, being people facing, convincing people, negotiating, compromising, the people facing part of it, which most chefs shy away from. Traditionally, how was that for you? Did it come naturally to you to sit on these tables and have a voice, or did you have to build that up to be able to be in this position today?
I mean, I don't know if I entirely agree with that. I think that managing a kitchen is maybe one of, and I wasn't managing a kitchen when I was
Yep.
working in restaurants, to be clear, but I think a lot of the skills that I did learn, like about leading and managing, came from restaurants where I
Okay.
saw chefs like really getting a group of people excited and oriented towards producing a goal that's really freaking hard. Like that is essentially what a founder of a business needs to do. You need to get people, be that investors, employees, a community, excited about doing something that statistically you shouldn't be able to achieve. And I think that a kitchen can be quite similar, and
Mhm.
operating under a lot of pressure, having to, you know, be in like literally a pressure cooker and make sure that people are getting along. And it's not always done in kitchens in the most elegant ways, but I think when it is done well, that translates very clearly into the business world. And I mean, look, also like most successful chefs are great entrepreneurs as well, at least the ones owning restaurants and leading kitchens. I don't know that there's really much of a difference at the end of the day. Like what you sell changes. I think maybe the bigger thing, which Jorge touched on, is like the timeline that it takes. You can open a
Right.
restaurant, and if you're busy, you can in theory be making money from day one. I mean, you probably have debt to pay back and investors, but like you can go from zero to like 100% capacity really, really fast. And a CPG brand takes a really, really, really long time to like get that scale. Like you need to sell a lot of $3.99 pastas to be making any money at all. And we got wise advice from people who said, like, you have this great community, your events. Like, we were making a lot more money hosting events than we were selling pasta. And we realized at a certain point, hey, we can't do both. So either like we're going to keep doing these events and that leads to having a restaurant, and there's like a fast growth but a short ceiling, in our opinion, or we go and like basically our revenue will just drop until we build up this product to the point where it can surpass that. But once that wheel is in motion and there is a product market fit and you have the supply chain and the production, then there's like no real stopping that snowball from rolling down the hill. So I think that's like the bet we took. But I think looking back on it, it definitely took longer than we thought it would. And that was probably a big learning for me coming from the restaurant world. It's like this 0 to 60 doesn't really exist in the same way.
Yeah, and so it's a different pace, different volume. But I also loved what you said, Leif, about how I was questioning that, how, I mean, chefs lack the soft skills when they face people outside their environment. But I loved how you said that it's transferable in the sense that you are leading a team, you are possibly, if not leading a team, leading a station, being around people, you have the kitchen camaraderie. So it's like looking at this new role where you possibly have to yes, face people if you're a founder, the people who work with you, but also looking at the suppliers, the people who you're going to manufacture with, all of them as stakeholders, and then thinking that, yes, I can face them because I have done that back. I think it's just a different language, a different environment, but it's 100% transferable. If you're a good leader, it shows up, change the environment, but the job at the end stays the same, to motivate people to go towards a unified mission, right? So I think it's been a great conversation for me. I think I can keep going because I think I'm personally so interested in entrepreneurship, and I feel it's like cases like you, which are in a niche, which is not a niche for many companies, but for you, it's like this combination of bread waste into pasta is two massive things. And as you said, it's a slow game if you want to go for the long run and want to scale it the way it should. And I think from what I've heard, your plans, the way you've shared how you have faced all the adversities and how you have kept going forward, I feel there's a lot to come out from here. I mean, I feel privileged to have you guys on the podcast early on. I really think this episode will looked up when Eat Wasted is in all supermarkets, hopefully at nearby everybody listening. So thank you so much for being. I feel you guys have shown a different side of food, because people just think if you want to work at food, go to a restaurant and work there and grow and make your own restaurant. But there's a way out there where you can build something which goes beyond the kitchen, beyond the service, something you're in your dry food storage. So yeah, thank you so much. If someone wants to follow Eat Wasted and your journeys, I'm going to share all the links. And yeah, once again, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Amazing. Thanks for having us. It was a pleasure. Great to meet you, and looking forward to following along.
Thanks so much, Friedmann. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much. If you're still listening and this episode truly helps you believe the chefs have a space outside traditional restaurant kitchens, follow the podcast, rate it, or share it with someone who might need to hear this. Because a lot of these paths don't look obvious until you see them. I will see you in the next episode.